Gators Breakdown episode 81 is ready to go. And this is an episode we wish we didn't have to do. Joey. Joey's going to join me here. Everybody knows Joey busy, but remember, I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. As I mentioned, Joe's going to join me here for this breaking news. You can find Joe on Twitter at JoV_GatorsPod. Joe, we'll just really get down into it. Everything kind of started filtering out yesterday about some bad news coming Florida's way. We'll get into the story of what happened, but the outcome is the biggest thing here. And 7 Gators are going to be suspended for the opener versus Michigan.
Yeah, I was grilling some sausages and some corn on the cob and drinking cold beer and watching the PGA Championship. And, of course, this has to happen right in the middle of everything. So you kind of interrupted both of our days. I know you got some family stuff going on yourself, but obviously this isn't ideal. But isn't it ironic, Dave, that you said this is episode 81 and Antonio Callaway's number is 81? The irony in that? Yeah, I actually.
Oh, man. All right. Don't blame us, people. Don't blame us.
But no, David, this is just another sad story in the string of sad stories in Antonio Callaway's career at UF. He's going to be a junior this year, and this is just one thing after another. We touched on this earlier in the season, earlier this year with Bill Sykes about how Callaway's just caused a lot of issues, even issues that weren't even made to be big issues. He's been involved with issues. And this is just another issue. Obviously there's a few good players in those names. Richard Desir-Jones, Kadeem Telfort was going to contribute, definitely. But Antonio Callaway obviously is the big name, and it's the name that just keeps popping up for all the wrong reasons. And David, I saw several people on Twitter express this sentiment. When is enough enough, David? When is someone going to be worth all this trouble? When is it going to be enough? I can't really think of the words I want to say, but when is enough enough to you, David?
Yeah, that's true. And, we're talking about star receiver Antonio Callaway. For what it's worth, as I mentioned, 7 players are going to be suspended versus Michigan. Here's the list. As we mentioned, Antonio Callaway, defensive end, Keivonnis Davis. Others guys, tackle Kadeem Telfort, Richard Desir-Jones, Jordan Smith, James Houston, and Ventrell Miller. Jim McElwain did come out with a statement when this was released. We have a small group of players that made some choices that are extremely disappointing. Action has been taken. They have missed some practice and will miss the Michigan game. We will use this as a learning opportunity, and we will have some players to step up as we move forward. Joey, as I mentioned, we did hear the rumblings on Saturday. You, myself, Bill, all kind of got together behind the scenes and said we agreed to sit on this because we knew there was much more information to come out still. Not everything that was being reported accurately. We just knew there was some more coming of this, and it was best to sit on it and see what the outcome was going to be. Now we'll dive into the story a little bit. Of course, these players involved, part of their scholarship agreement, they have some funds given to them. School issued funds that were intended for school use. The guys bought some electronics equipment, then later reported the card stolen. Some players sold the electronics equipment that was purchased with the issued funds, and now so these purchases either have been returned or the school wants their money back, basically, from these athletes. And Joey, you mentioned Antonio Callaway and the trouble he's been in, and even earlier this summer, back in May, when he was popped for the weed, having weed on him in a traffic stop. And then, a lot of people thought he should have been suspended for the Michigan game after that because it wasn't his first run-in. But, this is probably that was the first run-in with the law, or however you say it, or even the other stuff was the Title IX stuff and the sexual allegations. This is the first one that could be proven, was the when he was busted for weed. Well, now this is, basically strike 2 there, that everything that has been confirmed of him being punished for. When is enough enough? you have seen tweets come out about Antonio Callaway where fans are, even fans
ready to cut ties. They're ready to cut bait, David.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, your best player. I mean, our best player, David, and they're ready to cut ties with him before the season even starts. And that just goes to show, David, how serious people are about this situation. I mean, we could go into pay for players and all this other stuff and, likeness and all that. We can go into all that, but we don't have enough time in the show to do that. But, doing the wrong thing is doing the wrong thing. We both are fathers of small children, and we try to teach our kids that difference between right and wrong, because that's just what life is about. And obviously there's something there with Antonio Callaway that's just not clicking with the right and wrong. And about the traffic stop, David, it wasn't so much about the marijuana that I cared about, to be honest. It was who he was associated with in that traffic stop. The person has a pretty long criminal history. He's a known drug dealer, has been arrested in several states, and it's just the company that he keeps as well, on top of the issues that he continues to have. So, it's very disappointing. It's sad, and unfortunately for somebody like Callaway, you would think when you're going into your banner season, you're about to get drafted in April of next year. You would think that marijuana situation would have triggered a light bulb somewhere and said, "Look, I'm going to be losing money if I don't do something about myself." And apparently that wasn't enough, because we were told that this situation happened about a month ago. Actually, the actual situation itself. And it kind of So this is something that happened after that situation happened a couple months back. And obviously there's just something that's not clicking. But David, we were going to go into, after talking about Antonio Callaway, about the loss for the Michigan game. I don't know what you think about, obviously some of the names that we've heard are guys that aren't really impact players, but obviously Antonio Callaway is the best player on the team, and he's one of the best in the country. And, what do you think this loss does for Florida's, I guess, offensive scheme against Michigan, and that their defense, which is pretty decent?
Yeah, you have to hope with Antonio Callaway. I mean, either way, going into this game, you were hoping Florida gets better quarterback play. If they do get the better quarterback play, then the loss isn't as bad. But we've seen in the past with the first 2 years under Jim McElwain, when the offense has struggled, when the quarterback has struggled, Antonio Callaway is still able to make plays. He's not going to be there now. So if the quarterbacks are struggling and he's the star receiver that's not going to be there, and a quarterback struggles again against Michigan, who's the go-to guy now? Brandon Powell, can he pick up the slack and be that number one guy? He's of course not going to be playing outside as in the number one guy, but can he be the playmaker that they count on? Tyree Cleveland, of course, up and coming guy. We know he made some big plays last year, but you know what? Partnered with Antonio Callaway is what made him so good. Now he's more than likely he moves into the number one spot, is the main receiver who's going to be the deep threat, who's going to make the big plays. But you know what? Those big plays were easier to make when you had Antonio Callaway on the other side. Now you don't have that. So now hopefully Dre Massey, and we mentioned, before we come into this show, Florida's deep at receiver. Hammond, Massey, Powell, Swain, James Robinson, your true freshman who maybe can make something happen.
Rick Wells.
Rick Wells, who's still on the roster. Daquan Green. Some of these guys will be redshirted. We know that. But that's where it hurts me. If your quarterback isn't playing good, who's the guy that's going to step up? And Tyree Cleveland would have been a much bigger threat with Antonio Callaway on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, like you said, I guess if you want to look at it in a vacuum, I think Florida's situation could have been a lot worse than it ended up being. I think with Callaway, losing Callaway, although it hurts, I think it hurts minimally. I think Florida's receiving core is the deepest in the country, and I think that if there was a position where Florida could take a hit like that, it's at the receiver position. Obviously Kadeem Telfort's going to contribute this year. Hopefully Richard Desir-Jones is going to contribute. But those guys, that's all they are, is just contributors. They're not impact players like Callaway is. So I guess best case scenario happened for Florida in this situation. If there is a best case scenario out of this situation, I know it's a sad situation and it's embarrassing. But I guess, like I said, if there's a silver lining to this, it is the fact that Florida lost a great player at a position where they could afford to lose a player. I think if there was a hit on the offensive line, I think that would have been detrimental to Florida, especially against Michigan's defensive line with Hurst and Gary. Obviously, we know that Brown loves to dial up blitzes, and he's a very exotic defensive coordinator. He likes to confuse offenses and offensive lines with his blitzes. So I think losing somebody off the offensive line, especially a starter, would have been detrimental to this team. I think that would have been a dagger. But like I said, if there's any silver lining to the situation, that it's Florida lost a receiver from a very deep receiving core, even though it's their best player. But as we said a little while ago, going back, when is enough enough? How many more issues does Antonio Callaway have to have before Jim McElwain says, look, you need to get yourself together. We need to part ways. You need to go find some sort of help, maybe go to junior college for a year and find yourself and do something to get yourself together, or maybe you need to transfer to another school or something. I mean, I don't know, because I feel bad, because Antonio Callaway seems like a good kid. He does. I've actually met his mom. I met his mom last year at a game, and she's a very, very nice lady. And it's just very sad to see somebody like him, he can't let the life go, so to say. He's just always got his nose in something. And it's very tough on this day to be talking about this. This is a day where we wanted to be getting ready for the season and talk about good things, and unfortunately stuck in negative news.
Yeah, I guess when I look at this, would you say, like, right now, and, of course we have to see the game play out, don't get me wrong, but going into the game, would you say, is Florida losing or winning this game because of Antonio Callaway?
No, not at all.
Yeah, going into the game, maybe if you win the game, maybe you can say he made the play to do it. But if Florida loses the game, I'm not necessarily sure you can use the excuse it's because Antonio Callaway didn't.
No, Antonio Callaway not playing in this game is actually almost minimal. I think a game where I think it's weird, because a game against Michigan where they lost so many starters themselves, that Michigan, don't forget, is going to be trying to find themselves, especially on offense.
You read my mind. I was about to go
yeah, I mean, Michigan's still dealing with guys that aren't going to be there, that they've been used to being there for years. So I guess if there's any game where the perfect storm could have happened for Florida to lose somebody like Callaway, it would be this game. Michigan's secondary, obviously minus Jabril Peppers, is going to be a little bit different.
Five returning starters, Joey.
Yes, that's it. That's it. And unfortunately, two of those are on the defensive line, where they're really, really good. But
in a way, you could call those guys start with as much as those guys played last year and the impact they made. Yeah, you could go along and say those guys made some impacts last year with Gary.
Yes, but with as creative as Nussmeier and McElwain have been over the last 2 years, especially with plug and play. I mean, you lose Dre Massey in the first game last year. I mean, that was a blow. People don't realize he was in the game plan big time last year. I mean, we talked about Dre Massey earlier in this year. Losing Dre Massey hurt a lot of creativity on offense, because I don't know if people watch that kid's tape, but he's an electric player. And I think getting him back this year is kind of going to fill a role that Florida was missing last year. So, I'm not as concerned with what happened as far as the Michigan game goes. I'm not going to – I still think Florida wins that game. And I think Florida wins that game by 2 touchdowns or more, to be honest, even without Callaway. I just do. I think Florida's defense is better than Michigan's defense. And I think Florida's offense is way better than Michigan's offense. So that's why I say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something we didn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah.
It's it's just and we go through like I said, we go through the depth chart of receivers there, and some guys that we listed, some of them are not going to make an impact. We know that some guys aren't even available. We're just saying if we're listing the names there, that's the depth Florida has. So some of those guys, are some injured, not going to play. Some guys are going to be redshirted. But the main cog that we mentioned, Powell, Hammond, Swain. Hopefully James Robinson could come along as a true freshman and come along and make this. Of course, in the Michigan game, you're probably not expecting much out of him, but hopefully Florida can find something to go with. And like I said, and I'll say it again, if Florida gets good quarterback play in that game, it really minimizes the loss of Antonio Callaway. I'll stand by that. Yes, I know he's Florida's best player, and yes, I know with the offense struggling, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Hey, your best player's missing. You can't do anything on offense. Well, a lot of people are expecting this Florida offense to take off mainly because of the receiver core. And we know Callaway's the best one, but we think there's enough. With what Michigan's replacing, they're going to be figuring things out too, like Joey said. It is kind of, if there was a time this had to happen when you play a big time opponent, this is the perfect time.
Yeah, you don't want to lose Callaway midway through the year or at the end of the season, obviously. When teams are clicking, their defense is figured out. That's something that you don't want to do. But the first game of the year, like I said, I think this is a game where you can take a hit, like Callaway being gone. So, with that being said, like I said, I still think Florida wins this game, even with the suspensions. I think it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, and here's one thing I hate to kind of bring this up in a way, but a lot of these players, we hear how much they respect Jim McElwain and all that. But I mean, come on, and I know these are kids, and you're going to have a few outliers out there. But if you respect the man so much, quit doing stuff like this. I mean, come on, you know the situation you're putting yourself in, especially Antonio Callaway. We mentioned the past trouble and getting in trouble in May, and then now just a couple months later in trouble again. I mean, come on, he sticks your neck out for you time and time again, and this is how you repay him.
Yeah, it does. And it seems like McElwain, and I've met Coach Mack, and he's a really, really nice guy. His wife is very nice. I met her as well. And it seems like he's the kind of guy that just keeps giving and giving and giving, and Callaway just keeps taking and taking and taking without giving back. And I just don't know how much longer, his patience is going to be with a guy like Callaway. And as I've said several times, how many more chances can you give somebody?
Yeah. I guess we'll move on, from Antonio Callaway. Keivonnis Davis, Joey's probably the only other player, of name who, granted, he wasn't going to start at defensive end or anything, but he could be a rotational player, behind Sherritt, CeCe Jefferson, Zuniga, Clayton. He at defensive end, they probably move him along too, but 27 tackles, for in 2016, about 3 for a loss. So, not losing a whole lot in him. And I mentioned the names along the defensive line, especially defensive end, where he would be at more than likely very minimal loss. But the other guys there as well. It's it's not. Luckily, it's not any more starters than Antonio Callaway.
Yeah, Florida got out with a much better situation than it could have been.
So, Joey, you did mention, it doesn't really change your outlook for the Michigan game all that much. It just, I think the where it gets me is maybe preparation, the mental headache now that you have to deal with going into camp. But hey, here's another thing. At least this happens so early in fall camp to where you can adjust to this. This didn't happen the week of the game or 2 weeks of the game while you're preparing.
Florida has 3 weeks. 3 weeks to plug and play somebody else. Absolutely.
Yeah, so you're looking at something there that I think is one advantage of it. And we mentioned Michigan, the guys they got to replace. They've had a fall camp to figure that out. At least Florida went through 1 week of not having to deal Antonio Callaway's there with the first week of practice, but now this news came out. He did not scrimmage in the scrimmage this past Friday night. And I think people started connecting the dots there a little bit when this news started trickling out Saturday that he may be involved, but. It's just something we really didn't want to have to deal with right now. Going into the season, we were all hyped for this Michigan game. Everybody's ready for that game. It's a big time national game, maybe Florida's biggest opener ever, and this is going to overshadow that for weeks to come now.
Yeah, obviously it'll die down, but the big news for the next probably 24 to 48 hours is going to be this. Twitter's going to be a cesspool over the next day or two, but it'll pass over, man. Like I said, we're 3 weeks out, 20 days out from game one. I think that's plenty of time for, the coaching staff to figure something out. And just the fact that Callaway didn't even practice and he didn't scrimmage on Friday night means to me that the coaches already have something figured out. So I'm really not concerned that much. is Florida's offense less explosive with Callaway not on the field? Of course. I mean, that an idiot with 2 eyes and ears can figure that out. But it's just I just think the drop off is not as bad as people think. Like I said, I still expect Florida to win this game. This doesn't change my prediction at all. Does Florida maybe win by 16 points instead of 26 points? Maybe, I guess. I don't know. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I do expect it to be a close game, and can Antonio Callaway be that difference to where Florida wins? A close game. Sure,
I don't.
But like I said, you would have to think that the coaches would have something figured out to where that it really wouldn't have mattered in the long run whether he played or not.
Yeah.
So that's the breaking news. As I mentioned, everybody kind of knew this was coming along. Everything kind of trickled out Saturday about the issued funds from the university and how the players sold their goods and later reported a card stolen, sold the electronics, and then that's what happened. And they got caught once they reported the card stolen. And so now, as I mentioned, the purchases either have to be returned or the funds basically paid back to the school. As I mentioned, 7 players will be suspended for the Michigan game: Antonio Callaway, Keivonnis Davis, Kadeem Telfort, Richard Desir-Jones, Jordan Smith, James Houston, and Ventrell Miller. There, one more time, the remark from Jim McElwain: have a small group of players that have made some choices that are extremely disappointing. Action has been taken. They have missed some practice time and will miss the Michigan game. We will use this as a learning opportunity, and we will have some players step up as we move forward. So, Joey, anything else before we sign off on this breaking news edition of Gators Breakdown?
I hope Callaway keeps his nose clean, man. I really do. I'm assuming this might be his last chance. So maybe McElwain did tell him that, this is it. This is your suspension. Next time it's going to be your dismissal letter, from the, admissions office. So, I really hope this wakes him up. I really do, man.
Yeah, hopefully so. Absolutely, guys. Remember, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites to get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook. We'll be back tomorrow. This is a Sunday episode. As I mentioned, breaking news kind of. We'll be back on tomorrow. So, Joey, I think you're out for that one, right?
Yes, I will be back next Monday.
Yep, all right. So, next Monday. Bill Sykes and I will be on the next episode, and then Will Miles and I will preview. We'll go through the schedule on Wednesday. Will Miles and I are going to do a little season kind of preview, going through the schedule and kind of how it sets up for the Gators. And, of course, when we start with this Michigan game, that's going to be a little bit different now. So, for Joe, you can find Joe on Twitter at JoeV_GatorsPods. Gator Pod, my bad. JoeV_GatorsPod. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.